Hello there. What's up, y'all? I'm Spade, and this is my review of the Disney Plus series, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, before we get started, please give a like to the video and subscribe if you're not already. I appreciate it, and it really helps out the channel. Also, this is going to be a spoiler-filled review. The entire season is out on Disney Plus right now, so if you haven't seen it, check it out, then come back and watch this video. So I thought this one was okay. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it either. I thought it was a cool one-off Star Wars story, but for me it was a little mediocre. It had some cool action, and it was nice to see the characters and actors do the best with the material given, but I thought it was lacking in direction, writing, emotional resonance, and tells a story that's overall very inconsequential to the greater Star Wars narrative. But first off, let me talk about all the stuff that I liked about this series. Then I'll talk about my dislikes. Then we can have just overall discussion about the series and about the greater Star Wars universe at large. So as I mentioned before, I think the actors did a great job with the material they were given. Obviously, it was great to see Ewan McGregor back as Obi-Wan Kenobi. I liked seeing Hayden Christensen come back as well to play Anakin Skywalker, although he did look kind of old in that flashback there. That's alright. I just thought it was cool to have him back in that role, and for a flashback. And he also spent some time as Darth Vader underneath the mask, and in the Darth Vader costume as well. I also thought it was super dope to get James Earl Jones back to do the voice of Darth Vader. It was cool to get Jimmy Smits back doing his role as Bail Organa. And I thought the young Princess Leia, Vivian Lyra Blair, I think she did a pretty awesome job of embodying what Carrie Fisher brought to that role. Her mannerisms, her vocal tonalities, and of course, the Princess Leia attitude. Of course, I also thought the costumes, the set design, the look of the spaceships and the different worlds and the planets that we visit in this series, I thought those were all well done, and it looked and felt like Star Wars. And there was also a lot of flashy action moments throughout the series. Almost every episode there was something cool to look forward to. Some of my favorite moments being Vader versus Reva, where he absolutely dummies her with her own lightsaber, using the Force to control her own lightsaber and use it against her. And of course what everyone was calling the rematch of the century between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now I don't know if it was the rematch of the century for me, but it was pretty cool for what it was. Now personally, some of my favorite parts of the series were some of the slower moments. I thought it was pretty interesting to hear Obi-Wan Kenobi talking to Leia about how he remembers his family before he went to the Jedi Order, how he might have a younger brother, and I also really liked the part where he's explaining the Force to Leia, saying that it's like a light in the darkness. There's also a couple moments where Leia does something that reminds Obi-Wan of Padme, and Ewan McGregor just does amazing acting, and you could see it in his eyes, in his facial expression, and the emotion that he brings to the character, that he's reminded of a good friend that's no longer with him. And I really like those moments. I also really dug the mention of Quinlan Vos and the Path, I'm guessing where people are helping out the survivors of Order 66. But my personal favorite moment of the entire series has to be during the rematch between Obi-Wan and Vader. Vader's mask is busted open. You can see Hayden Christensen underneath the mask. The makeup was really well done. And it was dope because there was a blend of James Earl Jones's voice and Hayden Christensen's voice. And he tells Obi-Wan Kenobi, "You didn't kill Anakin Skywalker, I did." And I thought that was just probably the coolest moment of the entire series. It was a small piece of dialogue, but it had a big impact, and it had the most emotional resonance for me, because I was very interested in these two characters meeting again for the first time after so many years. And of course, seeing the confrontation and what they would actually say to each other. And I gotta mention that I think this series handled Darth Vader really well. They did the character justice. He was scary. He was ominous, his reputation preceded him at times, and he was like an unstoppable dark force. No pun intended. Now with all that being said, let me get into some of the things that I disliked about this show. Now I know it's a huge elephant in the room, all the racism stuff that was going on, people being absolute losers to Moses Ingram, the actor who plays Reva, and that's totally uncalled for. Whether you like this series or not, That goes with any kind of IP, Star Wars, Marvel, whatever it is. It's no reason to personally attack any of the actors, the filmmakers, or the writers involved. That's just childish and stupid, and it ruins it for everyone else who's trying to enjoy it. That being said, there's nothing wrong with criticizing anything or holding things to a high standard. But at the end of the day, Star Wars is about having fun and being yourself. Anyways, moving on. So now, Reva's character. From the beginning, I didn't know what to feel about her character. But then we learned that she was actually a Jedi youngling who survived Order 66 and actually saw Anakin come into the temple and kill people. So throughout the series, then we learned that she just became an Inquisitor to get back at Anakin, Darth Vader. A couple things about this I think were just not executed properly. I think we needed more moments with Reva to understand her motivations and where she was coming from. I think I would have had a more emotional connection with that character. I really did think maybe she was corrupted by the dark side, or maybe Darth Vader himself had corrupted her into becoming an Inquisitor. So I think that the writing kind of suffered. And also with her being almost like a main character in the show and a lot of people feeling that that was a bait and switch, to be honest, I kind of expected it going into it just because of how the advertising was. I didn't mind there being a primary antagonist to Obi-Wan, but there was a little bit too much. There was Darth Vader, there was Reva, there was Obi-Wan, there was Leia's story, then you got like the rebels, then you got the Inquisitors, and I just think it could have been handled a lot better and maybe streamlined a lot better. So like I said in the beginning, the writing suffers a lot just because of that. There's a little bit too much of little Leia in there. I really enjoyed her performance and I thought she was a great character, but unfortunately having her along for the entire series means that we have to constantly check in with her and give her things to do, and it kind of takes away from the more mature story of Darth Vader, Obi-Wan, and Reva. Again, with the writing, some of Reva's force powers don't really add up. We can see that she can read minds at certain points using the force, which is kind of a broken force technique from the sequel trilogy, but that's a whole other conversation. But at other times we see she's like chopping people's hands off, getting in people's faces, trying to interrogate them and scare a confession or scare an answer out of them, which doesn't make sense when she can just kind of hold them up and read their minds. And then at the end, the whole thing with Luke Skywalker, her choice to go after Luke, it really didn't make sense to me because she didn't know who he was. She literally just heard fragments of just saying that there's a child on Tatooine, something to do with Bail Organa and Obi-Wan, and she just decided to go murder this child. Also, with her being an Inquisitor and the point where the story's at, I would just assume that she's been doing like crazy horrible things for the Empire. In the story, if you know anything about the story, and the Inquisitors are relatively new, but they help Vader hunt down the Jedi, Force-sensitive children included. So what's not to say that Reva has already murdered children, multiple children. And she also killed the dude, the other Jedi, the younger Jedi that was asking Kenobi for his help near the beginning of the series. She killed him and strung him up, or supposedly she killed him and strung him up in the town. So she's been doing horrible things. Then, right at the end, when she decides not to kill Luke Skywalker, Obi-Wan is like, okay, now you're redeemed. And now this character exists in the Star Wars mythos, and I'm assuming we're gonna get more stories with her, but to be honest, her arc kind of ended even before she went after Luke. I think her arc ended when Vader killed her. That would have been perfect. Maybe leave it ambiguous as to if she survived using her hatred and anger, and then maybe she could show up at a later time still out for revenge against Vader. Kind of a character like Ventress was in Clone Wars, the animated series. The other thing I found that was a little bit problematic was having Obi-Wan and Leia be with each other and get to know each other on the level that they did for so long of a period of time. It seems like a young child would remember something like this happening to them. And then in A New Hope, for her to refer to Obi-Wan as someone who helped her father during the Clone Wars, as opposed to someone who helped her personally when she was a young girl. And then also in A New Hope, when she doesn't care at all that Obi-Wan died. She's actually more concerned about Luke feeling bad that Obi-Wan died than Obi-Wan himself dying. So I think that's a little weird. But it's not a huge problem. It's not like a make or break thing for me. I know a lot of people were saying that, oh, I've ruined the whole series for them. I don't know, that's a little bit extreme, to be honest. Another thing I thought was lacking in this series was the direction. Just overall, it seemed very weak. There were certain moments that were definitely handled really well. The cinematography, the music, the action, it all came together, but they were very few and far between. A lot of the action scenes were very confusing. The way they were cut was very jarring. It was hard to tell what's going on. And a lot of the times the characters didn't seem to be utilizing any kind of tactics or strategies, to be honest. Two great examples of this are the Vader and Obi-Wan fight and the hallway shootout with Obi-Wan and the Rebels. So in the hallway shootout in this show, the camera is cutting all over the place. Lasers are firing, people are falling down. It's flashy, it looks cool, sci-fi action, but you don't really get a sense of what's happening. It's kind of like people are just running all over the place and shooting guns. Compare that to the hallway sequence at the beginning of A New Hope, where you see the rebel soldiers forming up, taking cover against the walls, against the small crevices where they can. The Imperial troopers cutting open the door, the stormtroopers breaking through, some of them falling down. The camera pans over to the rebels, some of them fall down, gunfire's exchanged, there's a back and forth, it's clear what's happening, it's very clear who's on whose side, and it's just a better constructed scene. Also, in the Obi-Wan and the Darth Vader fight, it seemed like they were just hacking at each other with their lightsabers. It really seemed like both of them were just very angry at each other. And then Vader's choice to cover Obi-Wan up with rocks and just leave him there, as opposed to finishing him off, which is what he intended, is also very questionable and doesn't make sense with who Darth Vader is as a character, who we understand him to be since the inception of Star Wars. Again, the fight is flashy, it looks cool, it's filmed kind of competently, better than the hallway sequence, but again, they're just in this foggy environment swinging their lightsabers at each other. And now compare that to Revenge of the Sith, when Anakin and Obi-Wan fight each other, and I'm not talking about the production value here, I'm talking about the strategy and the tactics of the fight. If you pay attention to their fight in Revenge of the Sith, Anakin and Obi-Wan are using each other's styles against each other because each of them knows how the other fights. So they mirror their moves or they adjust their tactics accordingly. And it makes for a very interesting duel. The fact that it's Star Wars, it's lightsabers, it's flashy, and it's on a lava planet, specifically in Revenge of the Sith, is just an added bonus. My personal expectation was that Obi-Wan would be the calm one in his lightsaber dueling and use Vader's anger and fury against him, almost on some judo shit. So I thought that was very disappointing, especially for Star Wars. Because since the beginning, Star Wars always came through with the dope tactics, the battle plans, the lightsaber styles. In A New Hope, when they did the Death Star assault, they went to great length to explain the assault, why they were doing what they were doing. So it wasn't just ships flying around shooting each other, which also, yeah, it's cool, but there's a goal, there's motivation, there's a story there. That's the other thing, is that I found this series greatly lacked a compelling story. Like, look, listen, I know Princess Leia's gonna survive. I know Obi-Wan's gonna survive. I know Darth Vader's gonna survive. I know the Grand Inquisitor's gonna survive. Luke Skywalker, even Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, I know they're gonna survive. So there's almost no stakes here. Reva was the only one there was stakes for, because here's a new character that you don't see in the original trilogy chronologically in the timeline, so maybe she could have died, maybe she could have got killed. Again, it would have been cool to see her played as more of an anti-hero, have us root for her, have us be afraid for her when Vader's around. I just thought that would have been more compelling. I would have been more emotionally involved. The Obi-Wan stuff unfortunately just becomes the icing on the cake in this series. The story is very inconsequential to A New Hope, because at the end of this series, everybody is back where they were at the beginning of this series. Nobody really goes through a character arc. Even Princess Leia, she is confident and sassy and has the attitude and everything from the beginning. They even have characters explicitly tell this to her. So she doesn't have much of an arc. Like, it's not like she learns from Obi-Wan to be humble or something like that. I guess you could say Obi-Wan has his faith renewed, but I feel like he wasn't defeated in the first place. I think him and Yoda, they had their plan, and he was just waiting, biding his time. So I think maybe it should have been more about him, meditating and getting in touch more with himself, forgiving himself, getting in touch with the more spiritual aspects of the Force, figuring out that Darth Vader's alive, and then maybe dealing with, the turmoil of should I train Luke or not. So I don't really see the reason for this story to be told other than drawing revenue and being content, using Obi-Wan Kenobi's name to draw viewers to Disney Plus to watch the series. Which is kind of a shame because Obi-Wan's journey at this point in the story of Star Wars, for the most part, has been left ambiguous. We don't know what's really going on. But in A New Hope, he seems to kind of know something like the other characters don't. You know, he's got that sly grin on his face. So I don't know what was up with that. I was hoping maybe this series would explain that. So in conclusion, I thought the show had some pretty cool action. It was great to see these characters and actors back on screen. Everything looked pretty good, and there were some dope pieces of fan service and lore. But unfortunately, these episodes were lacking in direction. The writing at times was kind of all over the place. It didn't make me feel anything, and I felt that the overall story was very inconsequential. So my rating for Obi-Wan Kenobi will be 5 out of 10. Let me know what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Put it down in the comments. Again, please like the video if you haven't already and subscribe to my channel. It really does help out with everything I'm doing. Now let's move on to a little bit more of an overall discussion about this series and the greater Star Wars universe. So in terms of the other Disney Plus series, I would say that Obi-Wan Kenobi comes second for me. In first place, you got The Mandalorian. Second place is this show. And in last place, you got Book of Boba Fett. Book of Boba Fett, I really wasn't feeling, man. We could talk about that in the comments too, but I don't know. Personally, since The Mandalorian isn't an already established character like Obi-Wan or Boba Fett or Luke Skywalker, I'm more interested to see his adventures, what's gonna happen to him. I'm not sure if he dies or not, so there's stakes in that story. And it's at a time in the Star Wars storyline that hasn't really been explored too much. With Obi-Wan and Boba Fett, I think I was kind of expecting something. Even though my expectations are tailored, I do expect certain things from these legacy characters, or that if they're gonna tell a story with these characters, the story is gonna have some sort of consequence at the end. Or the characters will appear as I've known them my entire life, and not be some totally new character I don't know, like in Book of Boba Fett. My thing is, if you only watch the movies or you only take the movies into account, these series are fine. If you're not looking for anything other than just some cool Star Wars stuff going on your screen, then go for it. No one's gonna tell you not to enjoy anything. But you do have to admit that on a critical level, they're not doing too much other than their filmmaking techniques. I think this whole projection screen thing ILM is doing is some groundbreaking stuff. And I love that they're using more physical effects, puppets, and physical props on their sets as opposed to using CGI. So from a purely filmmaking standpoint, these shows are pretty good. But even in that regard, a lot of times they are lacking in cinematography, direction of scenes, and in the writing. And with the writing, I mean making things make sense. Like in this series, in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, we were just kind of bouncing around all over the place with Obi-Wan and Leia. I just think they could have told a tighter, more cohesive story that mattered a little bit more and involved Obi-Wan's core characteristics and strengths, was more focused on that than it was telling a story about Reva and Inquisitors and just kind of showing how Leia is. Because it didn't tell a story about Princess Leia. It didn't tell a story about Darth Vader or Luke Skywalker. It actually treated Luke Skywalker like a friggin' iPad kid. He just came off as a total dummy. Sorry, Luke. But I am glad that we got moments with Obi-Wan Kenobi, like small moments, where there is a story told about the personal journey he's going through. Albeit it's a very small story and it's hardly touched on in this series that's called Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think I mentioned this before, but the best thing for me was all the Darth Vader stuff in this show. That's what roped me back into watching. For those first 2 episodes, the tone of the show was just kind of silly and childish and was very much focused more on Leia and Reva than Obi-Wan Kenobi. But when I saw Darth Vader got involved, I was like, oh damn. And they did a very good job with him. Like when he steps on the set, he kills like a father and son right away, snaps a guy's neck, holds another dude up with the Force, tosses him. I was like, damn, Disney's really going for it here. But there are some key things to do with the story I was really hoping to see in this series. Unfortunately, it didn't deliver. But I was very interested to see what Obi-Wan and Darth Vader would say to each other after such a long time. Especially since Obi-Wan had been thinking that he killed Anakin this whole time, now seeing him back as this monster. There's this line in Return of the Jedi where Luke is talking to Darth Vader, and he says, I know there's still good in you, turn back to the light side, like screw the Emperor. And Vader says, Obi-Wan once thought as you did, but you do not know the power of the dark side. I must obey my master. And I always thought that was really interesting, that at some point after the events of Revenge of the Sith, because he didn't say this in Revenge of the Sith, Obi-Wan would try and convince Darth Vader to turn back to the light side after, witnessing what he'd become. And maybe because of the dark side itself, or even maybe because of the Emperor, Vader could not turn back. Like he wasn't in control of it. I'm not saying that's exactly what I wanted to see, but it would have been cool to see them pay off that line. And I was hoping to see them kind of make a nod to it or something. But the other big thing was I was, again, hoping that there would be some dialogue between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader, some back and forth, and a little bit of closure for the both of them, to be honest. Enough so that Vader would leave Obi-Wan alone and not go back looking for him, and therefore not be drawn to Tatooine or know anything about his children, or Yoda, or any of that stuff. Because if he just let Obi-Wan go, I don't think there's a reason why he wouldn't be trying to track him down. And then obviously Reva went to Tatooine, Bail Organa's message. There's just a little bit too many plot holes there, and it just doesn't do it for me personally. One more thing I want to touch on that's from the original trilogy is when Vader says the circle is complete. Last time we met, I was the learner, now I am the master. And I was hoping to see that maybe an inexperienced Vader, inexperienced with the dark side at least, he was very strong with the Force as a Jedi. I was thinking that maybe as Darth Vader, he has to relearn how to fight, especially now that he's using the dark side as opposed to the light side. Being Anakin Skywalker, able-bodied with most of his limbs, and drawing on the light side of the Force is probably a much different experience than being in this human incubator and using the dark side of the Force. And Obi-Wan, I was hoping, would have mastered the spiritual elements of the light side of the Force to a point where Vader would have been physical with the confrontation, trying to use his lightsaber, trying to kill Kenobi, but Kenobi maybe uses his own hatred against him or flips his attacks against him. And then when Darth Vader sees Obi-Wan on the Death Star years later, he says, now I am the master. Kind of implying that, okay, I was a rookie the last time we met, so you dummied me. This time I'm gonna take you to school. But Obi-Wan had this sly smirk on his face when he gave his own life as well. And I always wondered about that. Like, did he know he was gonna die? Did he know how those events were gonna play out? Is that why he was so adamant to go to Alderaan in the first place? Anyways, as you can see, there's a lot more to explore about Obi-Wan, his time on Tatooine, and the time before A New Hope. They did greenlight a season 2, so while I'm not highly anticipating it, I am hoping that it deals with more of the consequential parts of this part of the story of Star Wars, and I am going to be interested to see what they do with it. I do hope they do a little bit of a better job, but again, I liked it for what it was. If it's Star Wars, I'm probably going to be there for it. That being said, if you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much. It really means a lot to me. I hope you guys are enjoying all the content I've been putting out for you. If you came to see me live or are coming to see me live at one of the shows this summer, big salute to you. If you didn't know, I also rap a little bit. I make hip hop music and beats. I also got a little bit of merch up. If you've been digging the shirts I've been wearing during these reviews, You can purchase them from my shop. I'll put a whole bunch of links in the description so you can check that out. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as I always say, that's a wrap. Peace.